Oh, okay, yeah.
I don't know if you know that in terms of evolution, flowering plants are like the most advanced of all plants.
Wait, let's go closer. Yeah?
Like when dinosaurs were first on the earth, they fed a lot on like conifers.
Yeah.
And then along comes something like 75 million years ago, flowers evolved as a way of utilizing things like insects and actually also wind to pollinate each flower. Before that, it was just like conifers would just shed their pollen into the wind, and it would be pure luck whether some of that pollen made it to another cone, right? But what happened was, about 75 million years ago, the plant kingdom evolved flowers, ways to actually produce pollen from a flower with petals and all this, right? And the most primitive ones were like magnolia trees.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the big, huge white flowers with really primitive organization. And things that would pollinate them would just literally climb in there and climb all over the place looking for nectar, because nectar glands evolved in flowers. And they would get covered with pollen. And go to the next flower, climb all over the place, and hopefully pass the pollen from the male part of one flower to the female part of the next flower, right? So these big, huge flowers evolved, and then basically you have a whole bunch of plant orders come out of that, like grasses, orchids, all these different types of plants, right? One plant which evolved is this little green stuff here.
Okay.
Its Latin name is lemna,
Okay.
but its common name is duckweed.
Duckweed, okay.
Right? Because the ducks eat this. You'll see them going around like this on the surface, right?
Yeah.
And this is the smallest flowering plant in the world.
This one?
Yes. Because, like, for example, in my hand, I'm holding a couple of dozen plants.
Yes.
But the funny things about these, even though they're flowering plants, they don't normally flower. What they do is they reproduce asexually.
Oh.
And if you look really closely, you'll see little tiny ones. Like, there's the ones with the little...
Oh, yeah, I see little tiny ones, yeah.
There's the ones like this, which have little, like there's 3 of them there. And if you hold one up sideways, like you kind of pick it up like this, you can see each one has a root.
Oh, wow, that's so neat.
So they're a floating, flowering plant that, in order to reproduce, they just usually do it asexually. It's like mitosis.
So, like right underneath here, they're reproducing.
Yep. And they'll just bud. It's often just called budding, right? But I can see here in some places, there's like tons of even tinier ones that have been shed as buds.
Yeah, I can see this. These little ones, right?
Yeah. And I don't know how it's done. I had a professor who was teaching this, a course on this stuff. And he said that people who know what they're doing in aquaria can get these things because they'll dry them out slowly, right? And apparently just before they start like going like dried out and dying, they will flower.
Oh.
And when they flower, it's a way to quickly produce like this microscopic seed and survive to the next year.
Oh, wow.
So the flowering only happens when forced. In this perfect, rich environment, they just do everything asexual.
Right. So if it has this kind of environment, what does that mean about the water?
Well, that's the thing, like, you know, you were saying earlier how there's so much algae.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of algae, but there's all these other plants. This thing is ceratophyllum. It's a total healthy plant. It's not algae at all. It doesn't indicate anything other than it's a rich nutrient environment.
That's in like ceratophyllum.
Ceratophyllum. And almost all these things you could drag home and throw in your aquarium and they grow.
Yeah.
And I've seen people with like the whole top of their aquarium with the duckweed. And things like goldfish will eat the duckweed.
Right. Does this dry out well or no?
It's funny because if you were like a vegan,
Yeah.
you could grow this in your house and make milkshakes from it, like kelp.
Yeah.
You could actually cultivate this in your house and make food.
Interesting. Wow.
And then one of the ways to do it is to have fish in an aquarium, big aquarium.
Yeah.
Fish are pooping, producing nutrients. You have bacteria in the water, which breaks the poop down to like simple nutrients, which enter the water system. The plants pick it up like fertilizer, and they grow. So you get a whole ecosystem going in your house. You could essentially, like, this would be one way to go, I would almost call like off-grid, where you're growing your own food in an aquarium.
Oh my God.
But, I mean, I'm not saying it would be tasty.
No, I'm not saying that either.
You know,
but that's
what I think it would be useful.
Oh, look at this. That's so cool. So this is obviously not algae.
Yes, it's a plant. And that's also a flowering plant. I took pictures of this flowering a couple days ago.
Yeah?
Had these little, you might remember it, these little white flowers about this big
Yeah?
that were just scattered on top of the surface.
Yeah?
And that stuff there was sending a tendril to the surface, and it would poke out, and then it would produce a flower.
So where does it have its roots?
It doesn't have any.
It doesn't have roots.
It doesn't have, well, I shouldn't say it won't have it at all. Some of these things are just totally free floating.
Interesting. And so how do these guys reproduce?
By flowers.
By flowers, right? You were saying that they had flowers,
those are
right?
flowering plants also.
Right.
Again, so they're not primitive.
They're
Like
not
flowering
primitive.
plants by definition are fairly advanced.
These are like almost coniferous. Like you could see, like they're like coniferous.
Yeah.
They have a feeling of like a coniferous plant.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
All those what looks like needles
Yeah.
technically are leaves.
Are technically
Yeah.
leaves.
Like a needle is different than a leaf.
Yes. But this looks like a coniferous tree.
It does, yeah. They call that convergent evolution, when you have two different separate groups that actually come close in form, because both groups have found that the same feature works just as well. So for whatever reason, this plant has decided, instead of having a broad leaf like these lily pads,
Like the lily pad, yeah.
they do better with the filamentous leaves.
Well, this needs to have a root.
Yes, those things are actually rooted in the bottom.
The root in the bottom, but these are just floaters.
Yeah.
These
Well,
just float.
those might occasionally have a root. I don't know for sure. Like what you pulled out seems to be rootless.
Yeah.
I can't say it all is rootless. These things don't seem to do well in deep water. So
this
leads
seems
me to
like
believe-
this looks like it may have rooted.
yeah, it leads me to believe that. I see what's coming up here.
Yeah, this looks like it may have some kind of root.
It's got some muck on it. In terms of ecology, they call this is called emergent, because it grows below and emerges at the surface. The duckweed is not emergent, because it's right on the surface. Like, look right there, those are like millions of babies.
Yes,
Seeding.
right there.
Yeah, but each one of those little tiny specks will become big like these.
Right.
I have
Wow.
never seen duckweed this prolific.
Really?
Like I've seen it all along the trip, along the edges,
Yeah.
especially near the where we're getting out onto the platforms. I'm
Yeah.
seeing duckweed around it, but like this is
everywhere.
yeah, this is like paradise for the duckweed.
Wow.
I've never seen it this prolific. And
Does
obviously,
that mean it's healthy? It's a healthy
Yeah.
thing?
yeah. In fact, anytime you have this much like plant growth,
Yeah.
it's a very good sign that things are healthy.
Yeah.
The problem is it probably means the water is very nutrient rich.
Which
There's
means-
a good point and there can be a bad point. Because what will happen is if it gets too nutrient rich, when all this stuff starts to die and decay, the whole water system can go from what they call oxygenated, aerobic,
Yeah.
and go anaerobic.
Okay, yeah.
And then you get this bacteria groups that move in that do not need oxygen to reproduce.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy. Because that will, when it gets anaerobic, it means there's no oxygen left for the fish.
So obviously there's no
Right now,
gland muscles or see those muscle things here.
oh, there could be down below.
Yeah, they could be.
But see, the thing is plants both use carbon dioxide. What is it? At night, the plants use carbon dioxide, and in the day,
Oh, this is pretty.
they use oxygen.
But I can hear the. Oh, look at that bubbles.
Isn't the other way around? In the day, they convert the carbon dioxide into oxygen as part of.
Sorry, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. In the day, with the sunlight, they're doing photosynthesis, and oxygen is the byproduct.
Mhm.
And then at night, they use the oxygen. You're right.
This was awesome.
Right?
It's a great lesson.
But like I said, there gets to a point when there's just so much death occurring that the photosynthesis, like what happens is this bacteria moves in to eat this. The bacteria takes over the oxygen consumption and essentially turns the water stagnant, right? And then the fish die.
Right. But what?
And that's when it's called anaerobic.
But then this, we're not talking about like dying like fall duck, right? Like when it turns and the seasons turn.
Well, if it goes that way, like in the middle of the summer, that's not good. It's kind of common actually. Like I know when I used to live in Toronto in the ravine, go down the ravines, in late September.